This morning I'm going to share with you one traditional Advent reading from the first Sunday of Advent, and then one verse that is not so traditional. I read from Romans chapter 13, beginning in the 11th verse. Do you know what time it is? The hour has already come for you to wake up from your sleep. Now our salvation is nearer than when we first had faith. The night is almost over. The day is drawing near. And then from Mark, the 15th chapter. Some women were watching from a distance, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. When Jesus was in Galilee, these women had followed and supported him, along with many other women who had come to Jerusalem with him. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, on this Sunday morning that starts a journey toward Bethlehem and the receiving Christ once again, we ask you to help us to be attentive to your word. Open our minds, open our hearts. Be with us in our thinking and in our speaking, that somehow through it all, you will be known among us. In the name of Christ. Amen. In 1933, an American folk musicologist and composer named John Jacob Niles was traveling through his beloved Appalachian Mountains. John Niles grew up in Kentucky, where he developed an extraordinary interest in American spirituals and Appalachian music. During World War I, he served as a pilot that was stationed in Germany. To mentally and emotionally survive the war, he began writing some of the lyrics as well as the tunes that he had remembered from his rural Kentucky. After the war, he entered and received his musical education from the Cincinnati Conservatory and then moved to Chicago and on to New York as a professional opera singer. Through it all, his passion for collecting and writing folk songs remained. His two most famous compositions are Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair and Jesus, Jesus, Rest Your Head. When his performance career ended, he moved back to Kentucky to continue his pursuit of Appalachian folk music. On a cold December day in 1933, he was visiting a little village in North Carolina where poverty was immense. He was moved deeply by the scene of fresh falling snow with barefooted children clad in veritable rags running from store to store, peering into the windows, just wishing for one of the toys. It was such a contrast from life as he had known it in New York. Overcome with sadness at what he was observing, he sat down on a bench in the village to simply watch the people. Not far from where he was sitting, a young girl was singing a melody and text that grabbed the attention of the musicologist. He listened to what the girl was singing. He took out the journal and began to write down what he was hearing. I wonder as I wander out under the sky how Jesus the Savior did come for to die for poor, ordinary people like you and like I wonder as I wander out under the sky. The songwriter asked the little girl about the song that she was singing. She explained that it was the song that her mother had taught her, like her grandmother had taught her mother. He asked her to sing it again while he feverishly wrote down the tune and the text. Then the young girl excused herself, saying that she needed to get home and do some chores for her mother. Mr. Niles kept returning over the years to that village, hoping against hope to find that little girl, but with no success. The incredibly thoughtful song with its haunting melody united two very important themes: the birth and the death of Jesus. The song gave voice to one of the great mysteries of our faith. You see, there would be little or no reason to rehearse the Christmas story if it wasn't for Easter. It was the resurrection of Jesus that made the first century storytellers go back and ponder anew the birth of Jesus. Now think of it, only two of the four gospel writers dealt with the birth of Jesus. Mark and John did not mention the birth at all. Matthew focused his version of the birth of Christ on his ancestry, attempting to prove that Jesus was from the house and lineage of David. Matthew told his brief version of the birth story through the lens of Joseph. The Christmas story, according to Luke, is what we're all familiar with. When we celebrate Christmas, we do it through the story of Luke. Luke, the great physician, must have been a singer too. Because in Luke, Elizabeth sang, and Zachariah sang, and Mary sang, and the angels sang. Why, everybody was singing through the first two chapters of Luke. The mystery that captured the imagination of Luke was similar to the mystery expressed by that Appalachian folk song. The truth is, the gospel stories were not written until approximately 30 years after the resurrection. We must never forget that. We must never overlook the fact that the resurrection made everything else in the life and ministry of Jesus believable. It's much easier, isn't it, to look back at the beginning of a story when we understand the end of the story? The miraculous story of Christmas is at least possible when we look at it through the lens of the resurrection. Our challenge is to hold in tension Christmas and Easter simultaneously. But that's hard to do, isn't it? On Christmas Eve of 1916, the Tiffany window, this magnificent window, was dedicated as the center focus of the sanctuary of this church. In 1916, Christmas Eve fell on a Sunday, so there was both a morning service and an evening service. For several months, curtains blocked the congregation from seeing the installation of the window that was designed by the artist Louis Comfort Tiffany himself. In fact, Mr. Tiffany traveled from the Tiffany Studios in New York City the week of December 18, 1916, to finalize the incredible installation and that incredible work of art. The window was given as a gift by Mr. and Mrs. Edward Lowe in loving memory of his parents, James and Eliza Ellen Lowe, who were influential members and lay leaders of this congregation. Eliza was the daughter of Richard Butterworth. James Lowe and Mr. Butterworth developed the first iron foundry and machine shop in Grand Rapids that was located where the Civic Auditorium now stands. James and Eliza were community philanthropists, instrumental in building and maintaining the First Methodist Episcopal Church on Division Street. Because of his British roots, James was also instrumental in bringing the Salvation Army to the city of Grand Rapids. Edward and Susan Lowe, the son and daughter-in-law, were married in 1888. Susan was the daughter of D.A. Blodgett and had a dowry of $1 million when they married. While Edward remained connected to his father's iron foundry, he joined the administrative team of his father-in-law's lumber business. Edward and Susan built and lived in a house at the corner of College and Washington, a notable 22-room mansion here in Grand Rapids. They were active members and philanthropists at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Edward was a founder of Kent Country Club, Old Kent Bank, and the Michigan Trust Company. He was the architect of the mausoleum at Oak Hill Cemetery. Edward and Susan gave the property along with the first $500,000 gift for the new Blodgett Hospital. Edward served as the first chairman of the board until his death in 1928. When he died, he was considered to be the wealthiest person in Grand Rapids. Edward worked with Mr. Tiffany to design and install the resurrection window to honor the memory of his parents. According to the records of the Tiffany studio, there were 100 resurrection windows that were designed and installed around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world, and ours is one of them. Not one of the 100 windows were exactly the same. The dedication sermon and prayer on Christmas Eve was delivered by Bishop Theodore Henderson, presiding bishop of the Cincinnati Episcopal area, who had a great love for the people of Appalachia. The Henderson settlement in Kentucky was established and named in honor of Bishop Henderson. It was also a red-letter day musically because Professor Earl Moore, official organist at the University of Michigan, came to preside at the organ. It was an extraordinary Christmas Eve for the members and friends of First United Methodist Church. But did you notice? The resurrection window was dedicated on Christmas Eve. Isn't that curious? Being interested in church architecture and worship spaces, I remember clearly that within the first few weeks of becoming pastor of this congregation, I sat in an empty and eerily quiet sanctuary, just studying the window. I wondered then, just as I continue to wonder, why that particular scene? Of all the scenes that were possible from the New Testament, why that scene was chosen to be the visual center of this congregation. We don't have a cross at the center of our chancel like most Protestant worship spaces. It's not the baptism of Jesus that was depicted. It wasn't him being a shepherd, holding a lovingly lamb. It's not a scene from Bethlehem, nor is it a scene from early Methodism. It's the resurrection, the defining event of our Christian faith. So for 4 years now, I've wondered, I've pondered over and over and over again. Does this window that is at the focal point of our worship for these 100 years, does it speak poignantly about the soul, the very soul of our congregation? Does the Tiffany window define the ministry of our church, past, present, and future? Are we, in fact, Easter people? You see, from a theological perspective, the resurrection is what provides the Christian believer with love and hope and joy and peace. Those are historic Advent themes, but they are fulfilled within us through our faith in the resurrection. Mark 16 is the basis of this magnificent work of art. There are 3 women pictured: Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. On Easter morning, they journeyed to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus, which was a common custom in their day. They were met by an angel. Mark described that angel as being a young man in a white robe, seated just to the right of the grave cloths. The angel delivered the news that not only altered the life of those 3 women, but it has altered the life of every Christian believer since. But it wasn't the first time those 3 women were together. Allow me to take you back to what I read to you from the 15th chapter of Mark. The author wrote this phrase: some women were watching from a distance, including. That's an important phrase. Some women, so there was more than the 3. But it included Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. These women had followed Jesus and supported him, along with many other women who came to Jerusalem with Jesus. Some of us tend to be an awfully lot like those 3 women, don't we? Until we see with our own eyes, until we hear with our own ears, until we experience, we watch from a distance. You see, from a distance, we don't need to be engaged or involved because the story's not our story. We're safely removed from it all. At the crucifixion, all the men disciples went home. They lost their hope, but not the 3 women. The women could not remain distant. They had to come close. My friends, the coming of Christ, as well as the resurrection of Christ, are stories that invite us to come up and get close to it. Why? Because it defines who we are as people of faith. Being distant from the story is simply not satisfying. So this year our journey to Bethlehem will be examined from a new vantage point. Like Luke and Matthew, we're going to look at the birth of Christ through the lens of the resurrection, culminating on Christmas Eve, where we will rededicate this magnificent window. And who knows? Who knows? It just might surprise you what we will discover about ourselves and our faith when we celebrate Christmas through the eyes of Easter. Thanks be to God. Amen. Thank you for being with us this Sunday morning as we have begun together our journey to Bethlehem. We look at all the stories of the gospel through the lens of the resurrection. Everything in the New Testament was written after Easter. It changes the perspective. It's like the light goes on. Christ is seen in a new way when we look through the lens of the resurrection. So in all the celebrating that you do this Christmas season, as you journey through Easter, or through Christmas, through Advent, look at your journey through the lens of Easter and see what it does to your own spiritual development. Go with God and